Scientists of Reddit. What's something you suspect is true in your field of study but you don't have enough evidence to prove it yet? The Crespi-Badcock hypothesis, that autism and schizophrenia are exactly opposite neurological divergences, which develop epigenetically in the womb in response to entirely opposite environmental stressors, a world of excess and a world of scarcity respectively, and therefore are never comorbid in the same individual. My extrapolation of Crespi-Badcock is that autism spectrum disorder is really a first-world problem in the truest sense. It is rapidly increasing in the developed world, but not the developing world, because compared to the environment in which humans evolved, today's first-world embryos receive a stream of resources and conditions indicating it will want for nothing if the developing human does not anticipate needing the usually large amount of brain resources devoted to reading other people in order to survive. This frees up these resources for understanding systems. Essentially, a person on the autism spectrum is a person whose developing brain received the consistent message that they can make it on their own without relying on many other people, and that their brain power is better devoted to understanding lots of different and new systems to great detail. The brain, that's able to become schizophrenic, meanwhile, receives a consistent message during development that it's entering a world of great scarcity and insecurity, and being attuned to other people and their needs and what they communicate will be absolutely indispensable to their survival. The kickstarting event for the first psychotic break is usually some sort of forceful rejection or other form of psychologically traumatic social interaction in the late teens or early 20s for men and 30s for women. Autistic patients miss messages from other people that are indeed there. Schizophrenic patients see messages from other people that aren't actually there. Hyposensitivity and hypersensitivity to social cues, respectively. Source: I am an independent general practice physician with a strong interest in psychiatry and behavioral health, who is himself on the autism spectrum and attracts largely patients who are on the autism spectrum. Environmental geologist: that there is a huge amount of environmental contamination, soil, water, air, in residential areas, and rapid development is only making the problem worse. Most people in populated areas are likely very, very close to known sites with dangerous contamination, and the number of unknown sites dwarfs what's been addressed. On top of that, in the USA, low-income housing projects don't need to meet as stringent environmental regulations, so a site that fails for normal residential use might still qualify for low-income housing. Where I live, there was a site with buried toxic waste next to a river. They were afraid it would get exposed, so they built a big shopping center on it. Yep, this happens all the time. Sell the land for super cheap with the stipulation that whoever develops it encases that shit in concrete and maybe paves a parking garage over it and puts shops on top of that to avoid vapor intrusion. Do you think this is why some unexplained cancer clusters are out there? Yes, there's been a lot of research going on to try and show this. A notable one in the US is radon exposure if you live in the Midwest, Southwest, or an area with naturally high radon levels. It's been linked to a myriad of cancers that aren't necessarily connected, but they've definitely shown that radon hotspots have much higher cancer rates compared to normal areas. At this point, it's such an issue that many home sales in radon-prone areas require radon testing before closing. As far as chemical waste leading to cancer in surrounding areas, you can look up Love Canal in New York or Libby, Montana for some good examples of when this has happened. For another ongoing problem, you can also look at groundwater contamination in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, related to natural gas production drilling fluid disposal. A massive issue with the research is trying to identify people who have been exposed and developed illnesses. Unfortunately, these people are usually not well off, so their ability to seek care or even report their symptoms can be extremely difficult, and if they are seriously ill, they may die before anything is noticed or linked. Thankfully, more work is being done and it's getting some attention, but it's not enough. Gut bacteria has evolved to influence our behavior, either directly or indirectly, to crave foods that benefit it. That's why it's hard to come off certain foods. Anecdotally, it's hard to give up high sugar, high fat foods. Yet, if you go for long enough without them, your desire for them drops massively. I believe it's because the gut flora that likes that food dies off and no longer influences your behavior. It's very, very hard to prove, but it seems self-evident that if bacteria even had the slightest opportunity to evolve a means to do this, it would almost be a certainty. As a former math and physics major, I took meticulous notes of my son's epileptic seizures. At one point, I added barometric readings and current weather data to standard information of date, seizure type, and seizure length in seconds. I'm convinced that low-pressure weather systems increased the frequency and intensity of his epileptic seizures. During a trip to North Carolina, the area had an unusually stable high-pressure system. He didn't have any seizures during our time there. My theory is that high or low-pressure weather systems microscopically change the flow of fluids in the brain or other neurologically sensitive areas of the body, such as the microbiome of the gut. I have migraines, and I've noticed a strong correlation between headache days and weather changes. I've often wondered if it isn't something to do with sinuses for me. I've also known many people who had more joint pain as the weather changed. Since I was a child, anyone with migraines in my family would religiously check barometric pressure on weather forecast because they expected to get migraines if it was at a certain level. I always dismissed it as old wife's tale, as there's no proof of that. It makes me wonder if it has something to do with it. Mine is in my field of cancer. Often patients treated for their cancer may have no evidence of remaining cancer at treatment completion. A not uncommon event is the cancer returns years later. The common belief is there are hidden cancer cells remaining in the body, maybe just single cells, here and there that we can't detect. Then they grow and the cancer returns after a few years with detectable tumors. The glaring problem with this theory is the time. For many of these cancers, they are rapidly dividing cells. Some cancers grow more slow. Not talking about those, although this may apply. If they were missed, it should not take 4 years or even 2 years for evidence of the cancer return to be detected. This just doesn't make any sense, given rapid cancer cell growth which had already spread around the body, metastasized. For decades, I have held an alternative theory, which I did not work on as part of my research due to where I worked and resources needed to do something pretty complex and expensive, and that is many of these patients are in fact cancer-free, and there are not hidden cancer cells. What might still exist after treatment are the precancerous cells that over a couple-year period to develop into cancer again. That is the simple answer. Here is a bit more complex. Cancer is not a single gene mutation event or caused by a virus alone. Multiple key genes need to be mutated, or virus infected with subsequent gene mutations, to get what we call cancer. That cancer is derived from a pool of precancerous cells, many of which we cannot identify, or very easily identify in the patient. One cell out of that pool will get the last key mutation, then that single cell grows into a tumor. So say a tumor is 100% surgically removed. You may not see surrounding precancerous cells as they may visibly look normal, and thus not removed. As mentioned, cancer involves multiple gene mutations, let's say 4 key genes. It actually varies for different types, for simplicity. Those precancerous cells we can't see may have 3 of 4 needed. Now here is the thing. It takes time to acquire that extra mutation, because how it works, and a few years makes a lot of sense time-wise. My hunch is that these cancer reoccurrences years later from cancer-free patients are actually the cancer developing again from these primed cells, and not some individual cancer cell hidden in the body for years, then showing up as a tumor. The timing of it just makes a lot more sense. So why has this not been shown? At least to my knowledge, haven't been following this that closely of late. This is a hard experiment to do for a lot of reasons. You need access to cancer patients and their tissue, and you need to be able to experiment on them ethically, which includes being sure you do not do additional harm to them beyond the cancer treatment. So many things you might need to do to prove this may not be ethically possible, as it could hurt the patient, and other things clearly would hurt the patient, and cannot be done. Another issue is being able to identify these cells using molecular techniques while the tissue is in the patient. Very hard, and again, may cause harm. But these techniques may be required to identify precancerous cells, which might be unidentifiable otherwise. Then conclusively proving that the returning cancer came from this route versus the hidden cancer cell can be very difficult. One might use a clever animal model to do this, which gives you access to all tissues whenever you need it. But this is not simple either. Mice are the easiest and cheapest model for this, but they only live about 2 years, which might not be long enough for something that takes maybe 4 years. Monkeys live longer, but your costs just skyrocketed for an already expensive experiment. Also, depending on the model, it may not actually really reflect what is going on in a patient. Always something I wished I was in a position to work on, but only really could contemplate the idea. This is fascinating and terrifying all at once. I'm 26 years past treatment for a childhood cancer with 0 recurrences so far, but I always have a fear that something might more or less set off a switch to make the cancer come back. The hidden cell idea honestly never sat right with me based on how fast cancer grows and spreads. At 26 years, you should go ahead and relax a bit. I am not an MD, but when you start getting beyond 5 to 10 years all clear, you should be in pretty good shape. Chemist here. If scientists got paid more and management types knew how to plan work more efficiently, we'd cure fucking everything. But we aren't paid enough, and management doesn't care as long as they get paid to sit around. So bench scientists just fart around finishing projects here and there, sometimes making a mad dash at the last possible minute to get data for a deadline, but mostly just surfing the web and drinking coffee. This is so accurate and sad it hurts. One of the worst things about STEM is realizing no one actually wants to cure everything. They give funding to low for what you need to do. Plus, with the lack of pay, many pivot into other roles like quants. We know that 25% of us were exposed to alcohol and sometimes other substances in the womb. I think 25% have some lasting effects similar to what you would see in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, but not severe enough to be diagnosed. It's called shadow disorder. Too mild to be diagnosed, but still some symptoms. I think a lot of people with either ADHD, trouble regulating emotions, sleep problems, or heart GI problems, and with prenatal alcohol exposure, may actually be experiencing FASD-like shadow symptoms. I think something similar is also likely true for sleep disorders. Either they're massively underdiagnosed or shadow disorder like you described. My doctor was convinced I had sleep apnea. Because I'm fat, it was a semi-safe assumption, but they ended up doing an in-lab study instead of the take-home. And it turned out my O2 stats just dropped throughout the night for some reason they could not discern. My breathing seemed fine, no apnea. But when they put me on supplemental oxygen, it of course shot right up. They didn't have a specific diagnosis for me. They just said it happens sometimes. I'm on oxygen at night now, and my life is totally different. Turns out low-level hypoxia for your entire life is pretty awful. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more awesome content. We've got plenty of great stories waiting for you, so be sure to check out other videos on our channel. See you next time.